You're listening to Panthers on Tap. I'm Curtis Rauen, joined by Bryson Karbley. We're just two fans sharing our love for the game in Carolina Panthers football. So join us, crack open a cold one, some bubbly, a little wine, some scotch. We don't care, whatever makes you sleep better at night. Before we dive into the episode, a little self-promotion. Stop what you're doing. Go give us a follow on Twitter at Panthers on Tap. Join the discussion on our Facebook group. We have over 2,500 members. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcast. Just search Panthers on Tap. We are 2 weeks out from the NFL draft. Bryson, how you doing tonight?
I'm tired, dude. I know both of us are. We've been, mulling through different situations, draft-related, trade rumors, everything going on, and I'm tired, but I'm excited to talk Panthers football.
Yeah, I am too. It's like I said last week. I mean, we were counting down the days to go into the draft last year in Kansas City. I do miss it. That was a fun time. It would be fun to go up to Detroit. Obviously, Carolina doesn't have the first round pick, but maybe next year when it's in Green Bay, I'll have to go back up home and put down some roots for the weekend for that trip. But tonight we got a pretty big guest here that we've had on this show. It's been a really long time, but he's been super busy. Let's bring him in now. That's Mike Kaye from the Charlotte Observer, Panthers beat writer. Mike, how you doing?
Doing well. I mean, I shaved off my beard today and prepped for this. And my son said, "You don't look like my dad anymore." So, I feel like the energy here, there's something new. There's a good vibe on Panthers on Tap right now. Good to see your guys' faces and hear your voices, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Well, let's start with your article that you put out. I think it was yesterday on the Panthers roster. And if you guys don't subscribe to the Charlotte Observer, I think it's 99 cents for the first month. Go do that. It'll get you through the draft and then bumps up from there. And ton of good stuff that you put out there, Mike. So let's talk about that article this week, because I thought it was intriguing about what you said about cornerbacks. And I just kind of want you to delve into what you said. I think that you said it was almost a dire need for Carolina. Do you think that means, and I'll just ask you this, do you think that means the Panthers draft a corner earlier than most fans think?
I do. I think that corner is a position that, for whatever reason, because you see J.C. Horn at the top of the depth chart, and we know how good he is when healthy, you immediately assume, well, they signed Dane Jackson, and he's got a connection to Dan Morgan. Maybe they see him as this number 2 corner. Troy Hill got re-signed at nickel. So you're like, they have a solid group. But if you think about it in reality, they traded away Dante Jackson. They lost C.J. Henderson. And I know the opinion was low on C.J. Henderson. And for a lot of the fan base, the opinion was pretty low on Dante Jackson too. But both of those guys had their moments last year. Dante Jackson, wildly inconsistent, but was still the number 2 corner and actually the number 1 corner for most of the year because, by the way, J.C. Horn has only appeared in 22 of the 51 games he's been eligible to appear in due to annual, injury woes. And I think, from their perspective, Dane Jackson fills one of those roles. Ideally, he's the C.J. Henderson. He had an up and down tenure in Buffalo. I mean, a pretty great 7th round pick outcome for them. But it's not like he was shutting guys down. He was a serviceable starter. And the problem is when you have a serviceable starter as number 2, when J.C. Horn goes down, you have a serviceable guy who would typically be a mid-level number 2 corner playing as your number 1 corner, and teams can attack that. Now, last year, the coverage was terrific, right? Even with J.C. Horn down. So you say to yourself, well, maybe Evero can just figure it out. He's the king of knowing this stuff. They brought in 2 safeties who know his system, who can play next to Xavier Woods. Cool. But you look at it and you're like, J.C. Horn's got his 5th-year option coming up. I think they will pick it up. It's not a certainty, in my opinion. That said, he could potentially end up, injured again. And then you're like, okay, well, now Troy Hill, who's 31, has to be the number 2 corner because while DiCaprio Bootle had an awesome performance against Chicago, he really doesn't have a lot of starting experience. And while this is a young team they're rebuilding and you can kind of take your lumps, I just think long-term you need somebody who can be insurance for J.C. Horn, as well as his bro pilot on the opposite side on the boundary. This, like, Evero's not always going to be that. Like, there's a trope in a lot of like HBO dramas where there's the character who like cleans up the mess. Like, all this drama is coming at the end of a season, and it's, Boardwalk Empire, and the bad guys in here. Oh, and then Richard Harrow just comes in and cleans it. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that shit, but like Game of Thrones, like, the one dude who's almost indestructible, Jon Snow's just going to figure it out, right? So, like, Evero's not always going to be there. You need to start developing guys. Cornerback is a premium position. I pulled a handful of scouts last week, or a handful of evaluators last week who were from 4 different teams. And they all told me this is a pretty average cornerback class, but if you can get a guy in the early second who maybe falls out of the first round, you feel pretty good about him. A guy that I think about is Nate Wiggins, who would essentially make history if he was selected, because he goes to Clemson, and we obviously know the Panthers and their Clemson history or lack thereof. So I think, like, from that perspective, as I'm rambling here, I just think corner, if you really look at it, not just the names, not just the talent, it's a little bit more unsettled than wide receiver, where you have Adam Thielen, who's coming off 1,000-yard, 100-catch season, Jonathan Mingo, who they just spent a top 40 pick on, whether you like it or not, and Deontay Johnson, who's on a walk year, has every reason to play extremely well this season. And by the way, is one of the best route runners in the league. So I just think, like, corner is so much of a need, and this wide receiver class is so stacked based on everybody you talk to. Like, 33, if somebody with a first round graded corner falls there, I wouldn't be shocked if they took a guy there.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting perspective. I guess the biggest talk of Panthers fandom is the need at wide receiver, and I guess it's not really considered as much as the need for cornerback, but there definitely is one there for sure. And staying with that positional or that position, there is a free agent corner who is popular among Carolina Panthers fans. He is just from down south, played here before. Could you see them making a move at cornerback in free agency, leading up to the draft or maybe thereafter?
I think if they were to look into Stephon Gilmore, I think it'd be after the draft, because then I think Gilmore would know what his market is with other teams as well. But I think, like, when you look at Gilmore, okay, so you say to yourself, when you look at their free agents, right, they had a clear type. They wanted guys who were under 30, mostly coming off their rookie contract, or who had connections to the staff. And that's what they did, right? Most guys are 28 or under. And most of the defensive players have a lot of connections to Evero, and they're signed to short-term deals. So you look at that, and then they bring in Jadeveon Clowney, who I think was a guy who was a signing where it was like, there's nothing here. Like, you're building from scratch. You need someone who's proven. I think it worked out where he really wanted to come home. They were willing to step up with a 2-year deal. He wasn't just going to be this, like, nomad pass rusher for hire. And so you felt like he could have some long-term impact. The problem with Gilmore is he's in his mid-30s. Corner is a position that drops off significantly after 32. I believe Darius Slay is the only other full-time starting corner in the league who's around the mid-30 range. And look, Gilmore was still playing well last year, no question about it. But I think from a price standpoint and an age standpoint, you've got to weigh that. Now, they did sign Derek Brown to an extension. They did get an influx of salary cap space because of that. I don't know the actual number in front of me right now, or off the top of my head. But what I would say is it pays to wait until after the draft, because if you do have a guy who falls to the second round to 33 or 39 and you draft a guy, he's cost controlled, and he's cost controlled for 4 years, as opposed to, signing Gilmore, which, if you get into cap talk, one thing that Brent Tillis has been very, very good at, and I've praised him a lot for, they are taking their medicine up front. This is a team that understands the 2025 and 2026, they're going to have an influx of cap space, and he is not attaching void years to these short-term deals. Very smart. Now, why would you add void years to it? It's become an in vogue thing for contenders who are going for it, where they spread out the cap space or the bonus throughout the length of the cap, but do it so that, like, if they sign a guy to a 2-year deal and they do 2 void years, they get that extra credit to spread, right? Like, so if it's a $12 million signing bonus, they can do $3 million this year, $3 million next year, $3 million the year after that, whatever. And then it accelerates, but you have the salary cap, if that makes sense. That's like the easiest way to explain it, but we can go into that at some other point. But with Gilmore, I understand the draw. I know how big the South Carolina fan base is here. But I think that would be a move for after the draft. Now, they could, he could turn to them and be like, look, I really want to play with Clowney. I really want to be home. And they work something out. But I think the proper strategy is to not force a move and figure it out once you know what you have in the draft.
Let's talk about wide receiver here for a minute, jumping to the offensive side of the ball here. What do you think the Panthers' focus should be with this position? And what I mean by that is we had Jordan Reed on here last week, and he was talking about the need for an X receiver and kind of, pushing back on the our ask of maybe like a Lad McConkey. And obviously he was an insane separator in college and was a hell of a route runner. But what do you think, as for you personally, and what you think how they should structure this wide receiver room? Do you kind of agree with that, where they need to go out and get that X, or do you think there needs, they could get a couple separators, they could get another slot guy, even though Adam Thielen's on the roster?
I think you'll notice with Canales, and if you watch his offense, he has guys line up everywhere. I think versatility trumps archetypes. I wrote about this in that column that you mentioned. That said, look, everybody's chasing the X, right? Like, that's like the dragon everybody's going after. There are only like 6 or 7 legitimate X wide receivers, or number 1 wide receivers, as most teams would make them in the league. And so I think, and those guys all come in different shapes and sizes. Like Stephon Diggs is different than DJ Moore, who is different than AJ Brown, who is different than DeAndre Hopkins. You know what I mean? Like, there are only so many Julio Jones-esque X receivers. And that's what makes them special, where you say, hey, look, you're going to line up against press. You're going to beat press probably 7 out of 10 times, and you're going to make the play. I think for them, picking at 33 and 39, that guy doesn't exist. I think what does exist are separators, as you said, speed. There's a lot of speed in this class. And I think that's kind of where you're looking at. Like Xavier Legette, like, if there was an X body type who could make a bunch of different plays and play everywhere, he'd probably be that guy. He reminds me he's got so many different tools. I saw South Carolina play UNC live. He really impressed me. I don't know if it's the 17, but he reminds me of a faster Alshon Jeffrey. But, like, he's got a lot of tools. If he's there at 33, I would not blame them if they selected him. But I think there's more to it. Like, you bring up Lad McConkey, Ricky Pearsall, Xavier Worthy. Like, all these guys, there's so many different speed guys who could maybe work from the slot or the Z position and eventually take over for Adam Thielen. You've got guys who can line up at X and potentially be that Deontay Johnson heir apparent if he doesn't work out. But they need to find a guy who, no matter what his role is, he can play well. I think that was the mistake with Jonathan Mingo, is like they liked him, but I don't think the previous staff understood his strengths and weaknesses in a way that it was going to work. And I think he was a guy who did not have a lot of production in college. That was a mistake. You want a guy who's going to be able to dominate. I know he was in the SEC and he had all the injuries, whatever. But I think for them, they have to be really careful. We've seen how they've struck out with second-round wide receivers. Mingo, Terrace Marshall, they're still here, and they're going to try to salvage those guys. But I think from their standpoint, the two things that really stood out last year is a lack of route running prowess and a lack of speed. And when you talk about Ladd McConkey, I mean, my guy, that's basically what he is. Mm-hmm. And look, I don't know that. I think fans will be disappointed if they don't take a wide receiver in the second round. I don't think it's a lock that they do just because of how good this class is. I just did a mock draft that's going to come out next week. I have them taking a guy in the third round. So because
fans are going to lose their mind if they do that.
Well, because of a trade back opportunity and because of a scenario we kind of just talked about. But like, here's the thing. I mean, they're bringing in this guy in Dave Canales and bringing in Brad Idzik, two former wide receivers coaches. You've spent this investment on Mingo. You've traded for Deontay Johnson. They don't need to get trigger happy at wide receiver. This is not the class for that. It's so deep, according to every pundit you talk to, that you're going to be able to find guys into the third round. And if they double up, hey, there you go. I'm not buying the whole double up on day two thing. This isn't one of those Malcolm Kelly, Devin Thomas sort of situations. If you follow the Washington franchise, I just don't. I'm not a fan of forcing a need pick, and I think that's where teams get in trouble. They force the Mingo pick. They force the DJ Johnson pick. We've talked about it on this show. I've been incredibly critical of last year's day two. Incredibly critical. To the point where sometimes I'm like, am I too critical? But like this situation they have here with Dan Morgan trying to plant his flag, they have a former wide receivers coach as head coach. They've got a former wide receivers coach as offensive coordinator. They have a pretty good wide receivers coach in Rob Moore. Like they should be able to figure this out. Sean Jefferson was no slouch either, but I think this is a very like-minded coaching staff, unlike last year. And I think, you've got to trust the guys to teach. And Deontay Johnson was a huge upgrade. They still need to do more. But I wouldn't let me ask you this. If a guy that they had a first-round grade on at another position like edge or corner or center dropped to 33, and then they selected him, and then 39 they got offered, a third-round pick this year and a third-round pick next year to move down, 15 spots. Are you really not going to take that? And then when you get there, oh, cool, there's a linebacker and there's a tight end who you have a similar grade on, but wide receivers, there are a few down the board. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Also, I think from the standpoint of playmaking, if you can get the right tight end, that's just as valuable as getting the right wide receiver. And I think that's something that probably should be talked about a tad bit more. I don't know if that guy's in the draft late in the second round, but it's just worth considering.
See, my concern with the tight end while you bring it up is this class. This doesn't seem like a great class for it to go and get out and get, they don't have of last year where there was a plethora of guys in the second round that you could pick from. So that's kind of my concern with that. But I do agree with you. I think if an edge falls, like you said, the corner, Wiggins, if someone falls like that, maybe even a center into that 33 spot, I think you definitely would. I think they're definitely going to consider it, and I wouldn't hate them for it, but I think I would have a hard time if they didn't go wide receiver with that second pick, but that's just me.
Yeah. So Mike, let's say they're sitting there that, opening pick day two, one of the quarterbacks fall to the second round and, pick 33, and they're getting calls for teams to trade up to select maybe like a Bo Nix or a Michael Penix. Do you think there's a situation where Carolina trades out of 33?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think they will be very judicious about the way that this team wants to win through the draft. That's what they want to do. They hired a true evaluator. They've got a guy in Canales who likes evaluation as well. I think this is a team that learned last year that not having a lot of lottery tickets leads to mistakes. And I think they're going to all be on the same page. I think Dan's a guy who it's not his way or the highway. He's going to be collaborative, but when it comes down to it, he's going to have his opinions on prospects because he scouts. And he's known around the league as a guy who finds like gems under the rocks. And so, I think for them, having 2 picks in the top 10 of the second round gives you so much flexibility. I was just talking about this with somebody. Like, you can, in theory, potentially get that second round pick back for 2025. You could enhance the value of the Burns pick to make it to where it is digestible, because there are some fans that are still like, wow, they got bamboozled, right?
Yeah.
And so I think they can move around effectively. I think also having 39 allows you, if you really wanted to, and there were 3 guys you had first round grades on, and they were, it's pick 26, you could, in theory, move up. I don't expect them to move up. I think moving back is definitely more plausible. I think they do trade one of the 2 second round picks. I just don't know which one. Obviously, it depends on how the board falls, whatever. I think that 39 last year was a learning lesson for everybody. They should have traded back. I said it several times. And they didn't, right? And so they fell in love with a wide receiver. Now, no one's saying like you want to be in love with like the guys you draft, but I think from that standpoint, it was clear that they needed youth and that they needed to add a lot to that roster. And I know, I had them winning 8 games and no one thought they were going to be as bad as they were, but I think it took this franchise back several years.
Do you think, I think I know where this is going to go for
in that draft. Sorry, excuse me.
I think I know where you're going to go with this answer, but do you think Bryce Young has any weight to the wide receiver class at all on what he values? Because I know last year, obviously totally different regime, but they had asked him. I remember when they showed in that draft video after the fact that, what do you think of Mingo? And he's like, yeah, I like him type thing. Do you think he has any weight or any say at all into who they're kind of looking at that wide receiver position, or probably not?
I mean, typically what happens with coaches is they'll say, hey, is there an archetype that you like? Or what do you need out of this position? What skill set? It wouldn't shock me if Bryce was asked, hey, what do you think we need here from a skill set? I don't think anybody's going up to him with this regime and being like, hey, do you like Ricky Pearsall? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that that's a really smart way of, I guess thinking in a real world scenario, right? Like if there was a new hire and this happens all the time, but like a manager has somebody interview like a peer, right? Like, I don't think that the peer's recommendation is going to have so much weight that it determines the hire. You know what I mean? It's just a matter of feeling out the process. And I think, I think they know what they need, which is speed and separation. I don't think they need, a 23-year-old second-year quarterback to tell them that. Then again, we saw what happened last year, so who knows?
What's your thoughts on the edge position now that, they got Clowney, they got Wanham? Do you see them going after someone in that second round if they don't trade those picks, or let's say someone falls at 33?
Yeah, I mean, I think 33 and 39 would probably be their last ditch effort to get an edge rusher. Like I said, you obviously don't want to force a need pick. I think signing Clowney and Wanham to 2-year deals gives you time and allows you to kind of be not necessarily passive at the position, but not, sweat if there's nobody around the way they did with DJ Johnson, which was, well, whatever. Anyway, sorry, I'm beating a dead horse there with that pick. But I think, from their perspective, Edge has its starters. I don't really know how they feel about Barno because initially it didn't feel like he was a very good fit. He was kind of mysteriously unnoticeable in training camp. I didn't really notice him a lot in preseason. He flashed a little bit in the regular season. DJ Johnson, to me, he plays like he's a 5-tech at outside linebacker. So maybe that's a spot where they eventually move him. I don't think there's a lot of depth there. I do like Iku Leota. I was very positive about him during training camp last year. I think he flashed quite a bit. Canales even brought up while we were in Orlando that he flashed against Chicago. Look, the Calebon Chason signing got a lot of heat. He's kind of really, if you look at the contract, is like a prove it deal. Like they lose $500,000 in salary cap space if they cut him. I do think they need a third edge, but it really depends on what happens with DJ Johnson. I don't think they're necessarily. I mean, it's still a need, right? Like it's still a need, but I don't think it's as heightened. Then again, I also think people are going to overrate Clowney. I think Baltimore really allowed him to kind of spread his wings and be effective. That defense does wonders for everybody. If he goes from being a 9.5 sack guy to a 5.5 sack guy, nobody's going to bat an eyelash and say but he's proven he's an incredible run defender. Wadham was a guy who didn't face a lot of double teams. His win rate wasn't terrific either. I do really like his upside. He's very athletic. I think if he can recover from his injury, I think he will be an effective player. But this is a team that low bar has not been good at rushing the passer. So you can really only go up from here, I guess.
And Curtis, we'll end on my question unless you have anything else to ask.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So you talked about it a little bit, Mike, your record prediction last year. I want you to give your way too early record prediction for this season for the Carolina Panthers. I know, obviously, there's still a lot of questions. We haven't gone through the draft or anything yet, but they go through and have a decent draft. Let's use our imagination. How do you see this Carolina team improving, if at all, under Dave Canales?
I mean, I think if they win 6 games, that's like a massive win for this franchise. That's tripling your win total from last year. It's a better win total than Matt Rule ever had. I think you can point to that and say there's tangible growth there. Do I think they'll win 6 games? I don't know. It depends on how the schedule shakes out. A lot of that is on Bryce. A lot of that is on how the offensive line holds up. I think this defense is talented. I don't know, if they have a lot of depth. I said this on your show last year. I said if they have 1 or 2 major injuries last year, they were cooked. And lo and behold, they had several major injuries and went 2-15, even though the defense was somewhat sturdy. I think A'Shawn Robinson's going to be a bigger signing than a lot of people realize. I think he allows you to stop the run on both sides with Derek Brown on the other. I think Josie Jewell can operate this defense. It depends on how Shaq comes back, but I think that's a solid starting group at inside linebacker. And look, they're going to be better against the run this season, which is going to help them. I think Deontay Johnson was a massive upgrade that they needed. So I have it probably 5 wins. But, if Bryce takes a major step forward, we've seen in this league, the second year is typically when that ascension or massive dissension kind of happens for guys. And I think he's a guy who makes a lot of sense as a guy when you can give him protection, can operate a little bit more quickly. Canales is going to coach him up. There's a quarterback's coach, but Canales is really the guy that's working with him. And, he's worked wonders with Geno Smith and and Baker Mayfield and even Russell Wilson. So I think, they hired a guy who is bought into him, and they have a GM who's bought into him, and I think they're going to try to set him up to succeed where they didn't last year.
Mike, I know I don't want to keep you, but I do have two quick questions, if you don't mind. If I could keep you. Just talk about the center position, because I feel like, yeah, Corbett, it's a great move, whatever you want to call it. But there is concerns there, at least for me, of, this guy's coming off of 2 major injuries, hasn't really had a lot of game film really at the center position. I know he played a little bit in Cleveland with it, but take me through that position and what the need is there to either bring in a guy through the draft or someone else.
Yeah, I'm with you there, Curtis. I think it's definitely a risk. He is a really brilliant football player, and I think and he's a good leader, and I think that's why they feel good about him. To me, he was the best player on the entire offense in 2022. Like, not even close. I thought he was the best player on the offense. And so if he can get back to that form, it upgrades 3 positions. He's also way more athletic than Bradley Bozeman was. So in theory, the projection makes a lot of sense. My concern is he's coming off his 2nd major knee injury in 2 years. He, like you said, has not played the position. Like, he'll be able to call out protections. That won't be a problem. It's a matter of being able to snap the ball effectively and efficiently and being able to block, especially when he faces nose tackles one-on-one, which hopefully that's not the case very often, and it probably won't be. I think you do need to kind of hedge your bets. Zach Frazier is a guy who really impressed me at the combine with his toughness. You want to talk about dog. The guy broke his leg and was doing position drills like 3 months later. Graham Barton, I was at his pro day. That guy could play tackle, but if he's at center, that dude's built like the Hulk and runs like a gazelle. I think what is it, Tanner Bodolini, the kid from Wisconsin? I know he's got some buzz.
Lord, baby.
He's a guy who can get out in space. They need somebody who's athletic and can pull. That's really, really what you want. And so I think if you're the Panthers, you say, look, Austin Corbett's entering the last year of his deal. He's going to get the first bite of the apple at center. If he's not up to par, we have this rookie behind him. I don't know that you need to spend a 2nd-round pick on a center. I know I would. My one criticism of the free agency is I would have probably signed a center and a guard as opposed to 2 guards, because then you have a little bit more flexibility, especially because you already have 2 returning starters at guard instead of pushing those guys back and trying to just upgrade the depth. But they obviously didn't do that. I think center is an extremely important position, even more so than left guard. And look, we'll see. I mean, they've spent a lot of money on the interior. If you really care about this offensive line, you're going to hedge your bets at every pass. And as much as I like Cade Mays, investing in some legitimate center, competition makes a lot of sense. I think center is an extremely important position when a guy is not athletic enough or quick enough or blocks well enough at that position. As you saw last year, there is a clear discrepancy in that position. I was told at the combine that they were going to address the center position even before, all this stuff happened, and they were in on some guys. And in theory, I assume it just shook out that they signed 2 guards. I mean, that's the thing, is like, it's so fluid with the transactional stuff. Maybe the draft is where they plan on addressing it. And this is a good center draft by all accounts. So I guess we'll see there.
All right, let's leave you with this, because I asked you this last year when we had you on during this time. Feet to the fire. I asked Jordan this last week. What you know right now, who did the Panthers draft at 33?
A football player. Like, I mean, 33, like, if this was like number 5, it would be easier. But, like, it's hard to – I think wide receiver is the most likely position they will take, is what I would say. Who that guy is depends on how the board falls, but I would say wide receiver, cornerback, and edge rusher in that order, if I had to guess. I think, look, I don't want this to be taken as a report and it goes everywhere as much as that would help you guys, but I think they're going to stick to their board. This is going to be a true personnel process, I think. And I think that that's good. I mean, I think they've come in with they came into free agency with a very succinct and clear plan. While they delved away from it a little bit to sign a big name, I think the draft, they're going to be patient. They're going to plan it out. They're going to try to go about it the right way. I think Brant Tillis is a really sharp guy. I think Dan Morgan has shown that he knows what he wants. We'll see if that pays off, in the long run. I think Canales is heavily involved. And so I think they don't have to force wide receiver. Look, here's the thing. Let me ask you this. If there were 5 guys that you had second round grades on at wide receiver and you're picking at 33, but you also have 39, that pretty much everybody isn't going to take a wide receiver in between then. Like, are you forcing a wide receiver at 33? I know you want to fall in love with somebody, but like in reality, 39 gives you the cost benefit of being able to wait that out and maybe even potentially trade back a little. So that's why I would say, like, if you're watching the clock and they draft, I'm just throwing out like Zach Frazier from West Virginia, right, at center, or they draft somebody like, Nate Wiggins at cornerback at number 33. If you're panicking about wide receiver and like Pearsall and McConkey and Leggett and all these guys are still on the board, why are you panicking? I guess would be my thing.
No, I agree with you. I totally agree with you on that. I think a dream scenario is if one of those guys do fall and there's still a lot of wideouts still left on the board. I think you can have wiggle room, and I think more than likely they're going to be trading back. I think they'd be stupid if they didn't, and especially if a guy like, we didn't even talk like a Chop Robinson. I doubt he falls to the second, but if that guy even falls to 33, I mean, that would be pretty nice for Carolina too. But I appreciate it.
But that's also what, sorry to cut you off, but that's also why it's hard for me to be like, yeah, 33, they're definitely going to nail that guy. You know what I mean?
I gotta ask it. But I appreciate you taking the time. You gave us way more than what we budgeted for, so I appreciate it. And always go check out his stuff on the Charlotte Observer. 99 cents for the first month. It's Mike Kaye. We appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
We just want to thank Mike Kaye again for coming on and giving us some insight into the draft just 2 weeks away. We do want to touch on a couple prospects on the offensive side of the ball that we've kind of been looking at over these last week or two. So, Bryson, I'm going to start off. I'm going to go with Jonathan. I want to talk about Jonathan Brooks for a minute. And I'm going to start with him. He's my RB1, and for a lot of people, obviously. Yeah. But from Wisconsin, Braylon Allen I also like, but I think Jonathan Brooks is going to be a pretty damn good player, barring he comes back totally healthy from his ACL injury he had this last season. But I was watching some stuff on him. Really, I almost watched every single play he's had at Texas. They had a really nice cut up on YouTube that I was looking at. And he's elusive, light on his feet. He can make guys miss with his juke. He's got a spin move. He's patient at times. I think he needs to work on that a little bit. He can catch out of the backfield, which is another plus. He's got really good acceleration in the open field. Sometimes he needs to know when to just take off, though, and hit it. But he's got great balance, great power. I really like him. The thing is I don't know if Carolina really solely needs that need at running back. They have that, massive need there with both Chuba and Miles Sanders. So maybe if he falls, they go after him, but they did bring him in on a 30 visit. So that he is one to watch for me. And then I'll touch on the other running back while we're talking about it, and that's Braylon Allen. The guy is a bruiser back, downhill runner, pretty similar measurements from the guy that's escaping me right now. Help me out, from Tennessee, who just left. The big bruiser there. Derrick Henry. I don't know why I couldn't think of his name. Derrick Henry. He had very similar measurables to him, 240, 6'2". He's a big dude. If you try to tackle him high, he's going to break it. He's got a nice burst for his size. I think his hands are good enough, but he's got a limited route tree out of the backfield. So I think he'll need to work on that. He seeks out contact. He's only 20 years old. And I thought this was interesting. He actually he committed to Wisconsin in high school as a safety and linebacker. And he ended up, I think they were kind of light at running back, which is kind of crazy to think about because Wisconsin produces a lot of NFL backs. And they actually moved him and kept him on offense at running back. And then he just took over from there with Paul Chryst a couple of years ago. So he's got almost like a defensive mentality to him where he's not afraid to take a hit and he's going to seek it out, which is nice. And he had an interview I was watching yesterday, and he said, I just want to punish people. Like he wants to go out there and take you out. I think he needs to do a little bit better job at pass blocking. But I think this is a guy you could probably take in the third or fourth round and be okay with it. And Carolina needs a short yardage back. I mentioned, I tweeted it out there a couple months ago, or during free agency a month ago, with, maybe going after like an Austin Dillon from Green Bay. And this guy, I feel like he could kind of fit that mold, that short yardage type back for Carolina. So he's one I'm really watching and hoping. I don't know if he's had a 30 visit that I could find with Carolina, but he would be another one I'm looking at as far as running backs go. What about you for some of the guys you were looking at?
Yeah, my favorite running back in the class is the offensive MVP from the national championship, Blake Corum. Coming off of a 134-yard game on 21 carries, 2 touchdowns. Blake Corum, how about 30 reps of 225 at the combine? Absolutely ridiculous. He does everything you want for a running back. He didn't have much production catching the ball out of the backfield in college, but that's because they handed the ball off and he just ran the hell out of it. He's only 5'8", 205, but again, he's got the strength that you would want there, proving it with the reps he put up at the combine. And then I think one thing that Carolina's lacking in the running back room is that home run ability. You talk about a short yardage back, but they don't really have a running back that has any home run ability. Like Chuba is you're kind of like stereotypical, can run, get you 5-7 yards, but he's not breaking one off to the house. Miles Sanders isn't really doing anything in the backfield except for running the wrong routes and getting in the way of Adam Thielen. But Blake Corum is that guy. He has the home run ability. He showed it time after time at Michigan. The only concerns for him are his injury history. He did miss a lot of the 2022 season with a knee injury. And then his pass pro can be better. But I believe, on the next level with the coaching, bulking up, being in the NFL, that would improve as well. So Blake Corum is my favorite running back in this class. And I think that you could get him in the third or fourth round as well.
One guy I want to touch on moving to tight ends is Ben Sinnott, and that's a guy that Jordan Reed mentioned that's kind of I believe he said no one's really talking about and might get drafted higher than what people expect from last week when we had him on. And 6'4", 250. He reminds me a lot of the style that Tommy Tremble played at, more of an H-back tight end in the back. He kind of played all over. He was in the backfield, almost in that fullback spot. He played in line. He also played out in the slot as well. So he kind of moved all around. But he's very physical, very physical tight end. I thought he had good body control, and I put gritty. He just seemed like a gritty type dude. I don't know if I would draft him, how high I would draft him. I feel like this class, and we talked about this last week too, is it's not a loaded class like it has been in years past, especially last year. So I don't know how high I would be willing to go after one of these tight ends. But Sanat, definitely, there was some plays that catch your eye, and he's just dependable. And that's kind of, I feel like, what you want out of that position. But again, I don't know if you're going to go out and get, a Greg Olsen type tight end in this draft, just based off of the prospects that are in for 2024. But I do think there's some value there. And Sanat, he's got a rugged, gritty play style to him. So he'd be one to keep an eye on. I know they also brought him in on a 30-day or one of the 30 prospect visits. So he'll be one to watch. What about you for tight end? Any guys that come to mind?
Yeah, I'll just speak briefly on the guy that Mike was talking about, Ja'Tavion Sanders from Texas. Before we hopped on here, Curtis, you and I were talking about, like, how did Texas not win the national championship with all this talent they had on the offensive side of the ball? But yeah, Ja'Tavion Sanders, 6'4", 245. He is your stereotypical pass threat at tight end. He's a good blocker as well. But he exhibits the speed and the agility as a route runner that you want from the tight end position. He was super reliable in college as a receiver, and he's a jump ball receiver at tight end, essentially. I think that he's going to be one of the tight ends that go really early, though. I don't know if Carolina's going to have a chance to draft him. He could go in the first. He could go late second, early late second. But Sanders is a guy that I think if they want to add to a tight end room and add something that really is lacking in a deep threat ability from the tight end position, then Sanders would be a great option. He would improve the room significantly. I'm a huge Tommy Tremble fan. I've been on record with that for a long time. I think Tommy Tremble is going to be a really good tight end, but Tommy Tremble doesn't have the receiving ability that Ja'Tavion Sanders would bring to the field. So, yeah, I think if he's there, if you're at 33 or 39 and Sanders is on the board, then that's definitely a player that I would consider if I was Carolina.
What about center? Any centers? I know center's a position we were talking with Mike just a few minutes ago about, and I do think that's something they could target in the second or even later rounds. But any guys at center? Yeah.
For me, I've really looked at Zach Frazier. I know he's a name that a lot of people have talked about. Zach Frazier, he's a former wrestler. He is from Fairmont, West Virginia, played at West Virginia University, has spent a lot of time playing the position for West Virginia. I think that he brings versatility, as a depth piece to obviously oh God, he's escaping my mind. The guy they put there now that has never played center, but Corbett, yeah, obviously brings depth to that position and potentially someone that could overtake Corbett. If he does struggle, he is 6'3", 313. He's got the weight and the height that you would want in the position. He fires out of his stance with good pad level, usually. A good run blocker, and he exhibits good patience and pass protection throughout his time at center. But going through some of his stuff, there are areas of weakness. He doesn't really have elite athleticism or quickness, and I know that was something that Mike was talking about. Like, that's what you want from the center position, so that could limit his effectiveness. Pulling the center, and we've seen the lack of athleticism, how that affects an offense. We saw that last year at Bozeman, unfortunately. But, his arm length and lateral range, people say are average. We have a history of considering arm length and passing on a left tackle prospect that turned out to be one of the best in the league in Rashawn Slater, thanks to Matt Rule. So I don't take that into consideration very much. It's not a high concern for me. But, this is someone that I think Frazier would need to come in and probably sit behind Corbett for at least half a season, if not more, to, again, get into an NFL regiment of training. And so I think that could be a great fit. And I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of mixed reviews on Zach Frazier. Some people say that he might go in the first, he might go early second. Some people say he's a third or fourth round pick because his tape is really like up and down. But I think if he's there with 39, then that's someone that you would consider at that spot.
Yeah, another guy I wanted to touch on was Jackson Powers Johnson. Had 1 year starting at center this past season with Oregon.
Oregon,
and
I like how you say that.
I knew that was coming. But he does have some inexperience, obviously, with just the 1 year. He played in 2021. He played a right guard a little bit, left guard. He actually had a game at defensive tackle, which is wild. And then he played right guard in 2022, but then he got injured. But the guy's got some tenacity to him. Nasty, competitive type play style. And he did not allow a sack over 36 games in college, which is really impressive. I think if this guy, it seems like he's been trending towards the back end of the first round. But if this is a guy who does fall to the second, I wouldn't be mad at if Carolina went after him. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm some expert on O-line because I'm not. That's what we got Kevin Avery for. He'll be coming on in a couple of weeks when we do our mock draft. But this guy, I feel like, and I want to ask Kevin about this, I think this guy it would be a really good spot for, and again, would give that insurance for Corbett if things, if he goes down or it's just not panning out at that position. And then the other guy I want to talk about on offense, I feel like may be around in the later rounds, and then we touched on him a little bit with Mike Kaye, and that's Tanner Bortolini out of Wisconsin. Wisconsin produces the offensive lineman. You can't knock him on that one. And Bortolini has got positional flexibility, which I think is one of the key things. I mean, the guy, and I had a graphic here and I don't have it ready, but the guy played literally every position on the offensive line, I think, but left tackle. Like he has started numerous games at those positions. He was fully center this last year, but he's a really good player. And I feel like, and I've seen some stuff I was looking at Twitter tonight about it, and I've seen a couple reporters saying that he might go higher than what people expect in like the top 100. So he might be one to watch for the later rounds, but really like him. And he's got, I want to say he was a wrestler too. I don't know why I'm thinking he was a wrestler as well. Just seeing my notes here if I can find this, but I swear he was a wrestler. But anyway, this guy, I mean, he's got the lettuce going. He's got the mullet with the shaved on the side. Just seems like he's a cool dude. But on the field, like legitimately, he's pretty damn good. And I feel like this would be he's a perfect player for Carolina because I do think he does need some work. And I think Corbett in there would give him some time to get adjusted to the NFL. But he replaced Tippmann, who was an all-pro, I think, as a rookie. He was one of the higher-up rookies in the NFL this past year. So he had some big shoes to fill, and I thought he did a really good job this past year at Wisconsin. So he's another one I'd keep an eye on as far as the offensive side of things go. Do you have anyone else? I don't remember. So that is going to do it for us for the offensive side for prospects. Next week, we'll touch on the defense. Don't worry, we're not forgetting about defense. We'll talk about some prospects we're looking at. Obviously, there's, we talked tonight with Mike Kaye, there's a need at corner. I think, if there's a certain linebacker there, I think I get it. I know they went out and got Jewel but there's a certain linebacker there that we'll probably talk about next week that may be a possibility. And then obviously edge rusher. I think there's also a need there as well because they really don't have a younger guy at that position with going out and getting both Wanham and Clowney. So we will talk about that next week. We appreciate everyone listening to the Panthers on Tap podcast. You can catch our episodes wherever you get your podcast. Go give us a follow on Twitter at Panthers on Tap for all your analysis and breaking news. Don't forget, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube page. We're still waiting to hit 500 subscribers. We're getting there. I think we're around 450-ish. Once we get to 500, it's a custom free Panthers jersey. So hit the subscribe button. We really appreciate all the support. And as always,